It's been half a century since women have been fighting for equal rights. They are now almost 50% of the workforce. And yet, in Canada, we have women earn 20% less than men. We are way down the list of OECD countries in terms of pay equity. What do you propose to do about it?
You're right. We're fourth from the bottom of 34 OECD countries that were studied by Canada recently. And what's interesting there, Madame Pelletier, is that the federal government actually hid that report from the public. Fact-based decision-making is essential to come to the right decision in a government. Mr. Harper, unfortunately, practices decision-based fact-making. So we have to take that straight on. So there are some things that we can do, some of them social that will have an economic effect, like quality, affordable childcare, because we know that it's almost always women who have to make those tough choices in their careers when we don't have that available. That's why that's a top-line item for the NDP in this campaign. Pay equity, another key issue. Major report in 2004, more than a decade ago. Not only was nothing done, but in 2009, the Conservatives brought in legislation that provided for a $50,000 fine for a union that would take those pay equity cases. And sadly, the Liberals voted with the Conservatives to bring in those rules against pay equity. So we have to have a government that believes in making this a priority, and those are a couple of the things that we would do differently. We would make sure that we would have the ability to work on pay equity across the country, putting in place the structures to deal with it. When I was in Quebec City, Quebec became one of the first places to deal straight up with pay equity in the private workforce, and I think that there are lots of models that can be followed to make sure that we're providing for the result.
But in Quebec, women also make about 20% less than women. So there's not just the question of what the Conservative government has done to hinder women's advancement. There is really a question of discrimination there.
You're completely right. 80% of the people who sit on federal boards and agencies are men. That's something you can change overnight. You can mandate as a federal government that there will be 50% women on the boards of directors of all federal boards, agencies, crown corporations, and so on.
And are you willing to do that?
Oh, we've already made that commitment very clearly. Nikki Ashton, who's been a wonderful spokeswoman on these issues for us, has made that commitment, as have I. I went to a major event this year and I said that an NDP government will make sure. But we've also got a good track record to back that up. In the 2011 election, the NDP elected the highest number of women in the history of the Canadian Parliament. In this election campaign, we're far and away the party with the highest number of women. We've got strong women like Diane Freeman in Waterloo and like I say, Dowson here. We've got across the country women who are real role models that I'm so proud to have running for us. So my party president is a woman. National director is a woman. Our caucus chair is a woman. And if you look at the NDP's front bench in the House of Commons, that's the shadow cabinet of the official opposition. The front bench of that, of the 20 places there, 10 are women. We're actually getting it done because that's a fundamental value. Of our 8 leaders in our history of the NDP, 3 have been women. And that's, again, modeled in leadership.
Who had a lot of trouble, by the way, but that's probably another subject. But speaking of the representation of women, it's true you're far ahead of other parties in terms of women candidates. Are you willing to pledge to put 50% of women in your cabinet?
Why would you want me to restrict myself to 50%? There might well wind up being more, given the extraordinarily quality of women. But, you know, actions speak louder than words. Look at my front bench, the NDP's front bench in the House of Commons. Look at the front benches of the other party, the Conservatives and the Liberals, for comparison. It's very revealing. So, of course, that's a representation of what we're going to do. Well, we don't have to promise to do it. We're already doing it, but we're going to continue to do it.
Now, jobs. Your campaign promises have so far targeted infrastructure and manufacturing where there are not a lot of jobs for women. Where are the jobs in education, social and healthcare, where there are between 62 and 82 or 85% of women?
Well, don't forget, you've just named a couple of areas that are pure provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government can and should be playing a role to monitor and to make sure we have structures in place to look at pay equity across the spectrum. In my lifetime, I graduated law school in the 1970s. I went straight to the Justice Department in Quebec City. At the time, there were almost no women in senior leadership positions within the public administration. By the time I became a minister in Quebec City in the early 2000s, well, all of a sudden the situation had changed completely. I got to sit in cabinet with very strong women like Monique Jérôme Forget, so I learned a lot. through those years and working with those women about the role of women in the workplace, and that's something that informs all of my decisions. With regard to job creation across the country, I think that it's a more general case that we have to provide for better full-time jobs, because in Stephen Harper's Canada, we're looking at more and more part-time precarious work. You gave the 20% figure before, but it's almost always women who wind up in those part-time precarious positions. Very few benefits, no pension at the end of it. There are 120,000 senior women living in deep poverty in Canada, and that's a result of all of those biases that they've lived in their lifetime. So those are also things that we intend to correct with a clear plan.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned poverty. Poverty is something we used to hear the NDP talking a great deal about. These days, it seems even Social Democrats only have the middle class in mind. We're no longer talking about the poor. And poverty does affect 37% of single families led by women, and 21% of women over 65
yes.
who end up at the end of their lives
yes.
very, very poor, much poorer than men.
Yes.
So what's the concrete things that can be done there?
Well, on a few of those issues, because you mentioned a figure of over 30%, that's especially with regard to housing. So we have a plan to put in $2.7 billion over our first mandate on housing, especially to keep in place a lot of the cooperative housing that's there and the low-cost and social housing. That's a clear commitment. We're going to add $400 million a year at the end, by the end of our first term in office, specifically to help increase what's called the guaranteed income supplement, because exactly as you just said, it's women who suffer most from that sort of poverty.
Et maintenant, j'aimerais vous parler du sujet qui est probablement le sujet le plus douloureux en ce qui concerne les femmes et certainement qui constitue ce qu'on appelle l'éléphant dans la pièce. Et je veux parler de la violence. Oui. On a fait quand même des gains par rapport à l'éducation, par rapport à l'emploi, par rapport à la santé, mais par rapport à la violence, la sécurité des femmes, c'est effrayant.
Oui.
Je veux dire, c'est ce qui se passe ici, se passe également en Afghanistan. Une femme sur 3 dans sa vie va être violentée. Durant les 5 dernières années, plus d'1 million de femmes canadiennes ont été victimes de soit de violences conjugales ou sexuelles. C'est un énorme problème. D'abord, selon vous, pourquoi faisons-nous face encore aujourd'hui, après 50 ans de libération des femmes, à ce genre de fléau?
J'ajouterais dans cette liste tragique que vous venez de faire, les femmes autochtones. C'est plus probable, 4 fois plus probable pour une femme autochtone d'être tuée qu'une autre femme au Canada. À l'international, comme vous le dites, le viol est devenu une arme de guerre, que ce soit au Moyen-Orient, qu'on l'a vu en Libye, ou on le voit en ce moment à d'autres endroits, on l'a vu au Congo. Donc, il y a du travail qui a été fait chez nous par des gens comme Paul Dewar. Stephen Lewis, avec sa fondation, mène un travail acharné là-dessus. Donc, il faut avoir un plan d'action national pour enrayer la violence faite aux femmes. Aucun objectif en deçà de l'élimination serait acceptable en ce qui nous concerne. Il faut une commission royale d'enquête sur les femmes autochtones disparues ou assassinées. 1200 femmes disparues ou assassinées, aucune enquête. Imaginez que si dans la grande région d'Ottawa, avec une population similaire que la population autochtone, il y avait un tel nombre de femmes qui étaient disparues ou assassinées, on n'aurait pas besoin des Nations unies pour nous supplier d'enquêter. Ça serait fait depuis longtemps. Donc nous, on va faire ça. On a aussi un plan très concret pour les refuges, 40 millions de dollars. L'année dernière, mesuré au cours d'une journée, plus de 300 femmes et 200 enfants ont été refoulés à la porte des refuges à travers le Canada, faute d'espace. Nous, on va corriger ça.
Mais je sais que vous avez déjà fait une proposition en Chambre sur un plan national d'action contre la violence faite aux femmes. Ça a été défait. Les Nations unies maintenant demandent à tous les pays membres d'adopter un tel plan. C'est pour vous dire à quel point c'est une véritable épidémie et que ça affecte tout le monde. Mais qu'est-ce que ça veut dire concrètement, là? Comment allons-nous aux causes profondes de cette histoire?
D'abord, lorsqu'il y a des cas très concrets, comme la violence faite aux femmes autochtones, il faut l'étudier, il faut cette commission d'enquête. Des pays très similaires aux nôtres, que ce soit le Royaume-Uni, l'Irlande, Australie, Nouvelle-Zélande, ont tous eu des plans d'action nationale et ils ont réussi à réduire sensiblement la violence faite aux femmes parce qu'ils l'ont étudié puis ils ont mis en place les mesures. Donc, on va procéder dans l'ordre. Le Canada est très en retard et les chiffres le démontrent. Donc, nous, on a cette obligation de mettre en place un plan d'action national et on va le faire très rapidement avec la formation du gouvernement NPD.
Qu'est-ce que vous faites, par exemple, de votre réaction? Je ne sais pas si vous avez vu, ça vient de se passer. Ça a fait les manchettes il y a quelques jours. un blogueur anonyme qui menace de tuer toutes les féministes de l'Université de Toronto. On croyait que ces choses-là étaient du passé. Ça ramène de très mauvais souvenirs, évidemment. Mais on dirait que plutôt que de s'éloigner de ce genre de menaces, face au féminisme en particulier, ça revient de plus belle aujourd'hui même.
Oui.
Selon vous, pourquoi, là?
Vous avez raison. Ça renvoie exactement aux menaces de Polytechnique et la police a été mise là-dessus tout de suite. Mais je comprends la réaction des femmes à l'Université de Toronto où ces menaces ont été faites. Mais c'est devenu, malheureusement et tragiquement, quelque monnaie courante dans les milieux universitaires. On a chaque année des universités qui doivent réagir et vous avez tout à fait raison. Ça semble dirigé encore une fois vers les féministes. Moi, je pense que le plus important, ce serait que tous les leaders politiques, moi, je me déclare, parce que ça fait 30 ans que je travaille ce dossier-là, je suis un féministe. Alors moi, j'aimerais bien que quand les gens attaquent les féministes, qu'ils pensent aussi qu'il y a beaucoup d'hommes qui se considèrent féministes et qui vont se battre pour les droits des femmes ici au Canada et ailleurs dans le monde.
Je pense effectivement que la question du féminisme est à reprendre et à démystifier par les gens en place. Je voulais aussi vous poser la question sur la question de la violence sexuelle. Vous savez, il y a un an, il y a eu l'affaire Ghomeshi qui nous a complètement époustouflés. C'est un homme bien connu, très populaire, qui s'affichait féministe. On apprend qu'il abuse les femmes en privé, qui nous a montré à quel point c'est quelque chose qui sévit et à quel point c'est caché. D'ailleurs, c'est le genre de violence qui est le moins rapporté. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas quelque chose à faire par rapport au système judiciaire pour aider la dénonciation de ce genre de...
Eh oui, et je l'ai fait dans ma carrière. J'étais 6 ans président de l'Office des professions du Québec. On remonte il y a 25 ans, mais je me souviens très, très bien. On avait des cas clairs où des femmes avaient été victimes d'inconduite sexuelle de la part de leur médecin. On avait notamment un psychiatre qui avait pratiqué autant à Montréal qu'à Ottawa, puis dans d'autres villes, parce que de toute évidence, aussitôt qu'on découvrait, lui, il changeait de ville. Je suis allé à Ottawa rencontrer une des victimes, justement, puis j'en ai rencontré ici à Montréal. Nous, on s'est rendu compte qu'à l'époque, le Collège des médecins faisait défaut d'agir correctement, c'est-à-dire de sévir contre ces médecins-là. Et ils n'étaient pas nombreux, on se comprend bien, mais c'était un problème systémique. Ça appelait non seulement un changement de loi, puis on a changé le Code des professions pour interdire tout contact sexuel avec patient ou client d'un professionnel, mais ça appelait aussi un changement de culture, de comprendre que ça ne se faisait pas. Donc, nous, on a fait, et ça fait partie de ma carrière, c'est une feuille de route dont je suis très fier, parce que j'ai compris à cette époque-là, justement, que si on ne pouvait pas dénoncer, si on ne pouvait pas avoir la garantie de confidentialité, si on avait peur, ça allait continuer. Puis je vous dis que ces choses-là ont vraiment changé après ces événements d'il y a 25 ans.
I just mentioned the Jian Ghomeshi affair that happened a year ago, which really shocked a lot of people and started a whole campaign, Been Raped, Never Reported, which got 8 million hits within 48 hours, just to show you the extent of this problem. We learned shortly after that Parliament has no rules about sexual harassment. Why is that?
Well, Parliament had rules only with regard to employees and employers, but had no rules about members of Parliament amongst themselves. Jean Crowder, our extraordinary member of Parliament from British Columbia, worked hard, and there are now new rules in place. It was an obvious gap. But everybody was saying, well, they're elected members, they have their own way, it's politics, it doesn't apply. Well, it does apply. And Parliament will have rules going forward. So I gave an example from 25 years ago where we changed the rules. This is a contemporary example where something should have been done a long time ago. But I guess if you would have surveyed parliamentarians a decade ago, maybe they would have all said, that's not a problem here. It is a problem. Everyone has a right to be safe in their workplace, including a member of Parliament, and thank goodness those rules are now changed.
Another question affecting women, all women in Parliament, and in fact, one of your MPs, Megan Leslie, who talked about this eloquently during the Broadbent conference this year, how all women across the board are getting, terrible abuse on the social networks and on the internet. What are you prepared to do about that?
I think that the model there begins in Parliament itself. The catcalls from the government side tend to be strongest when it's a woman asking a question. We've tried to show a model in that regard. Social media are a very tough nut to crack. It is people expressing themselves. It is very often violence against women. I think that the only way to fight back is by showing the model, showing the example, denouncing it, saying that it's completely unacceptable. And when it goes beyond simple opinion and it does become a threat, do like we have done recently, is make sure that it goes to the police.
You mentioned, of course, this is a major platform of yours, childcare. To quote the Supreme Court Judge Rosie Abella, childcare is the ramp that provides women equal access in the workplace. So this has been a long time coming. There has never been a national daycare plan. I think you're taking your page from Quebec. However, there is still 500,000 children without daycare today, and a lot of people don't think you'll be able to really fill that gap.
You know, some of my political adversaries have said that. I listen especially to the Liberals, and I'm surprised. I'm frankly saddened because they take the approach that because they weren't able to do it, that it somehow can't be done. Well, I was in Quebec City when it was brought in. And it's worth reminding people that 70,000 women were able to reintegrate the workplace. A lot of them were on one form or another of government support. Not only did it give a big boost, 2% to the province's GDP, but it was actually studied by Pierre Fortin and proven that for every dollar spent on the program, more than $1 flowed back into government coffers because of that. So not only was it good for women, for their lives, for their careers, and for their families, but it was good for society and for the economy. That's why across Canada now, when I'm in Surrey, BC, the Chamber of Commerce, it's actually the Board of Trade of Surrey, is a strong advocate of the NDP's plan because they know it's going to help them recruit. In Toronto, it's $2,000 a month for an infant in childcare. $24,000 a year. How's a young family? And young people are coming into the workforce with this massive debt from their studies now. How are they even supposed to think about starting a family if the childcare is going to be $24,000 a year? And don't forget, it's again almost always women who have to make the tough choices in their career. Catherine and I went through that as well. I was able to finish my studies because Catherine was working. I was working when Catherine became a psychologist. But we had trouble finding childcare spaces for our kids, and it was a constant battle then. Now in Quebec, that's largely taken care of. That's a model we want to bring across Canada. It's good for women, but it's also good for the economy as a whole.
But I mean, it's a lot easier to do it on a provincial level, as Quebec has proven. Now you're talking a national daycare.
Well, we want to work with the provinces. We're not going to, it's not one size fits all. For example, the province of Ontario has 2 full years of kindergarten. We'll take that into account. I've said that every step of the way. And provinces are different one from the other. Some of them might want to have a differentiated and gradated pricing. That's going to be up to them, but we're going to sit down. One of the things I've learned in politics and in public administration, because I do have 35 years of public service, is that where there's a will, there's a way. If you've decided to make it a priority, you're going to be able to get it done. This is a top priority for the NDP in this election campaign.
But as we've seen time and time again in every electoral campaign, when it comes to women's issues, we're ready to put it on the back burner and let the economy or some other issue lead the way.
Madam
and we're
Pepsi,
talking about big bucks here, Mr. Muclair.
You're going to have this recording and this discussion. You can show it to me at the end of our first term of office, and I can guarantee you this. It will be a top priority. Governing is about priorities. I've been around the cabinet table. I know that it's tough to make these decisions day in and day out. But we go into this telling Canadian women and all Canadians that this is a top priority for the NDP. We're going to get it done.
And how are you going to convince a province who has a deficit and can't afford many things, let alone daycare, to put in 40%? That's what you're asking.
Well, that's exactly why we're going to be able to have the extraordinary work of people like Pierre Fortin backing us up. He was there when we launched our campaign. People will get to look at the numbers, realize that putting in 40%, it'll be a boost to not only to the people in their province, but to their economy as a whole. It's a good thing. It's not only something we can afford to do, Madame Pelletier, it's something we can't afford not to do.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Dealing with the provinces. We know how that can be a panier de crabe, as we say.
You know, the Liberals had 13 years to do it, and they didn't create a single space. The Conservatives have had several mandates, because we forget that even Stephen Harper discovered the merits of at least promising to do something about childcare. Of course, they created the same number of spaces as the Liberals, 0. We're going to get it done.
I'd like to just briefly ask you about a question that seems to have been settled 30 years ago, but it hasn't been completely settled, and I'm talking about reproductive rights.
Yes.
The Canada Health Act says that every Canadian woman has a right to have access to free abortion. Yes. And it's not happening. It's not happening in PEI.
Exactly.
In other provinces, New Brunswick, it's very difficult.
Yes.
How can you make sure that every province will honor the Canada Health Act?
By enforcing the Canada Health Act. And I was so surprised during the recent provincial campaign on PEI to notice, and I was sad to notice, that the Liberal leader completely failed on the issue of abortion with regard to PEI. We're going to talk straight up with people, say, look, this is Canadian law. This is the same health act that provides free, universal, public, portable health care across the country. It's an agreement amongst all the provinces, and we're going to make sure that that right is respected in all provinces.
Finally, I'd like to talk about foreign policy. Canada used to be an international leader on many fronts, but particularly on gender issues and women's rights. Famously, 20 years ago, Hillary Clinton went to Beijing on the Conference of Women and said, women's rights are human rights.
Yes.
And it did give an impetus to women's rights on the international stage. That has changed, and God knows Canada has been very active in the last 10 years to change that. We can mention the Muskoka initiative by the Conservative Party in 2010, which changed the priority from reproductive rights to maternal health care. What will you do to make sure that women in developing countries who have all the problems we have here as women and then some, I think there will be, by 2020, 142 million girls who will be married before they are 18, and 20 million or more women will die every year of unsafe abortions.
There you have it. Because as important as it is to take care of maternal and infant health, it's also become, in the conservative world, a code word for making sure that we don't provide safe clinical abortions in those countries where it still doesn't exist. And as you know, because we talked about it a bit earlier, there are lots of countries, including in Africa and in the Middle East, where rape is being used as a weapon of war. So if you're not able to access a safe abortion, then you will become one of those statistics. So we're not going to shy away from this debate, even though it's a sensitive one, and it's an emotional one and a tough one. But we're going to say very clearly that when Canada is involved in these issues going forward, an NDP government will make sure that a full range of choices are available to women, including abortion.
Are you going to scrap the Muskoka initiative?
Well, to the extent that that means that the Conservatives have excluded abortion when we're talking about that full range, yes. But for the rest of it, with regard to protecting infants and women's and their rights and the ability to take care of their health, that's obviously something that could be promoted.
Mr. Muclair, I can't finish this debate without saying that everyone has noticed that during this campaign, you have been playing it pretty safe. So in the name of the women who are listening to you, women's issues have been traditionally on the left. People are saying that the Liberals are now outflanking you on the left. Why should women believe you right now?
Well, we're talking about quality, affordable childcare, maximum $15 a day available across the country, and I'm proud of that. I was there in Quebec City where we tackled the tough issue of pay equity in the private workforce, and we're going to be leaders on that as well. Across the country, whether I was in Saskatchewan with First Nations leaders, a very strong woman, chief in Saskatchewan, Chief Jonathan, we were standing there saying that we would put in money on shelters, we would have a full inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women. We're putting these issues front and center, so whether it's childcare, protecting making sure that we have a national strategy for dealing with violence against women and putting the money on the table to make sure that we take care of women's shelters. Those are very concrete things that we're doing. We've spoken about women's issues across the country and every step of the way, and we'll continue to do that. We're going to get it done. You mentioned one of the parties that's running against us. The Liberals are using every excuse in the book to try to fight against quality, affordable childcare. That is a women's issue, first and foremost. We're going to get it done. It's not because they failed to get it done that it can't be done.
Advenant que vous formez le prochain gouvernement, M. Muclair, quelle serait la première chose que vous feriez pour les femmes?
Moi, je pense que la toute première chose sur cette liste-là, c'est de veiller à ce que l'égalité en termes de salaire soit devant toutes les considérations de notre gouvernement, mais les garderies à travers le pays, sur le modèle québécois, sont aussi une très grande priorité pour nous.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.